Something is heading toward Mars, and it's not acting like anything we've ever seen. It's called 3IATLAS, and on the surface it looks like a comet. But the deeper scientists look, the less sense it makes. It's brightening faster than physics says it should. Its atmosphere is ballooning to a size larger than Jupiter, and somehow, against all logic, its tail is pointing toward the Sun. But what's even stranger, every major space agency has gone silent. No new images, no updates, nothing. And yet amateur astronomers are flooding the internet with photos of a glowing green object ripping through space like something out of a sci-fi movie. So why the sudden blackout? Why now? In just a few weeks, this so-called comet is going to make a dangerously close pass by Mars, just a cosmic stone's throw away. And while scientists argue over whether it's breaking apart, heating up too fast, or simply defying everything we know about celestial objects, no one seems to be offering real answers. It's not just the science that's strange, it's the silence, it's the timing. And it's the way every telescope that should be watching suddenly stopped reporting anything at all. If this were just another ball of ice from the Kuiper Belt, we wouldn't be talking. But 3IATLAS isn't from around here. It's an interstellar object, a visitor from outside our solar system, which means it's not just rare, it's unprecedented. This is only the third time in history we've ever seen something like this, and the last two didn't behave like this at all. So the question isn't just what is 3IATLAS, the question is why is it here, and more importantly, what aren't we being told? 3IATLAS was supposed to be just another comet, a distant icy wanderer making its path through the solar system on a silent journey back into the void. But in mid-September of 2025, something happened that sent a ripple of confusion and concern through the global astronomy community. Without warning, the comet suddenly brightened, dramatically, not gradually, not over time, but fast, faster than it was ever supposed to. At the time, it was still roughly 2 astronomical units from the Sun out past Mars, and yet its glow intensified as if someone had flipped a switch. For most people, this might sound like a neat little space fact, a footnote in some NASA newsletter. But for scientists who study these things, people who've spent their careers mapping comet behavior down to decimal points, it was a red flag. Here's why it matters. Astronomers can predict a comet's brightness the same way meteorologists predict the weather. It's not guesswork. It's based on models, decades of data, and real physics. They know how sunlight interacts with the icy surface of a comet, how gases begin to sublimate as it heats up, and how that process releases dust that forms the glowing halo we all recognize as the coma. Based on its trajectory, size estimates, and composition, 3IATLAS should have brightened at a steady, predictable pace. And it did, at first. All through August and into early September, it was following the expected light curve almost perfectly. Then, sometime between September 7th and 15th, the numbers stopped matching. Instead of a slow, steady increase in brightness, the data points began climbing sharply, creating an upward curve that shot past predictions like a rocket. Amateur astronomers started reporting strange spikes, then professionals chimed in, and suddenly it wasn't just a comet anymore, it was a mystery. The immediate question was obvious. Why? What could cause a comet to brighten so quickly? Theories emerged almost as fast as the data. Some scientists suggested it might be an outburst, a sudden ejection of gas and dust caused by a pocket of volatile material beneath the surface. Think of it like a pressure cooker finally blowing its top. Others proposed a more mundane explanation called the aperture effect, a phenomenon where different telescope sizes and detection methods create the illusion of increased brightness. It's a real thing. Smaller telescopes with narrow fields of view can sometimes make a comet look more concentrated and intense, while larger telescopes might capture the full fuzzy atmosphere, spreading out the light and making it seem dimmer. It's the equivalent of looking at a campfire through a straw versus standing right in front of it. Same fire, very different impression. But here's the problem. Even when corrected for aperture differences, the brightness spike remained. The light curve didn't just drift from the expected path, it veered sharply. Observers watching the data unfold in real time could see the deviation plane as day, plotted in a line that started off smooth and predictable, then suddenly steepened like a roller coaster climbing toward the unknown. On astronomical charts, this wasn't subtle. It was the kind of shift that demands explanation. not the kind that gets swept under the rug with a footnote. The comet, for all intents and purposes, had jumped lanes, and no one could say for certain why. The implications are bigger than they first appear. See, when something this large and this distant behaves unpredictably, it suggests we're missing something fundamental about how these objects work. Either 3IATLAS is releasing more gas and dust than any known model accounts for, or we're misinterpreting what we're seeing. And that second option, that we're misinterpreting the data, opens the door to even bigger questions. What if this isn't just a comet? What if it's something we've never encountered before? Or worse, what if it's something we have encountered, but never fully understood? To appreciate just how strange this is, consider the speed at which 3IATLAS is travelling. As it barrels toward the inner solar system, it's moving at tens of kilometres per second. That's more than 200,000 kilometres per hour, fast enough to cross an entire continent in under a minute. By the time it reaches perihelion, its closest point to the Sun, it's expected to be going over 68 kilometres per second. That's not just fast, that's insanely fast. And it's not just speed that's catching attention, it's trajectory. 3IATLAS isn't from here. This object entered our solar system on a hyperbolic path, which means it came from outside, interstellar space. And unless something changes, it's not coming back. Only two other objects like this have ever been detected: Oumuamua in 2017 and TUI Borisov in 2019. But neither of them behaved like this. Oumuamua didn't even have a visible coma, let alone a tail, and Borisov, while more comet-like, followed a completely different brightness profile. In fact, Borisov behaved exactly like what we'd expect from a typical solar system comet, which is part of why 3IATLAS is such a puzzle. It falls somewhere in between. It's got the speed and trajectory of an interstellar object, the coma and tail of a normal comet, but with behaviours that match neither. And let's not forget the timing. The comet is scheduled to make its closest approach to Mars on October 3rd, passing within 0.17 astronomical units of the red planet. That's close. In cosmic terms, it's very close. Close enough to get the attention of multiple orbiting spacecraft. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter, and even the Mars Express mission are all gearing up for opportunistic observations, which is a nice way of saying they're watching this thing very carefully. And that raises the question, if this is just another icy rock, why is every available instrument being pointed at it? That's when people started to notice something else, something that didn't add up. Around the same time the brightening started, many of the world's major space telescopes went quiet. Hubble, James Webb, Gemini. Observatories that had been releasing regular data and images suddenly stopped. No updates, no press releases, no new data points in the usual public databases. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers across the globe were still capturing raw images from backyard observatories, grainy, colourful shots showing the comet flaring brighter and brighter. But the professionals? Silence. And that silence speaks volumes. Because when something this significant happens in the night sky, something rare, fast-moving and visibly changing, you'd expect more data, not less. Especially from institutions whose missions revolve around transparency and scientific discovery. So why the sudden gap? Is it just scheduling, operational constraints, or is it something more deliberate? Whatever the reason, the result is the same. As the comet gets closer, the data gets scarcer. And in that vacuum of official information, speculation is growing. Viewers are asking questions. Observers are drawing lines between disconnected events. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to shake the feeling that something's being held back. Because this comet isn't just brightening, it's behaving like it has a mind of its own. And the next anomaly, that's where things get even more bizarre. It wasn't just the brightness that had scientists rattled, it was what surrounded the comet, the coma, that glowing shell of gas and dust enveloping its nucleus. In normal cases, a comet's coma grows steadily as it nears the Sun. Ice sublimates, gas escapes, dust rides the solar breeze outward, and the halo expands slowly over time. Predictable, measurable, controlled by the amount of heat and the nature of the material buried beneath the surface. But 3IATLAS didn't get the memo. Its coma wasn't just expanding, it was exploding. Within weeks, it grew to absurd proportions, so vast that, if placed next to Jupiter, it would dwarf the gas giant entirely. And yet, at the core of this monstrous atmosphere, a tiny, near-invisible speck of rock and ice, estimated to be just a few kilometers wide. The math didn't make sense. The coma was simply too big, too fast, too soon. It was as if the comet was tapping into an invisible energy source, something more than just sunlight. Telescopes reported a coma stretching up to 700,000 kilometers across. That's half the diameter of the sun, from a rock no bigger than a city. And it wasn't just the size, it was the shape, the texture, the complexity. High-resolution imaging revealed strange filament structures, wisps and ribbons of material that twisted and pulsed like they were alive. Not just random scatterings of dust, but organized shapes that seemed to move with intent. That's when the plasma theories began to surface. A comet's coma isn't just gas and dust, it's charged. As solar radiation slams into the escaping material, it ionizes the gas, turning it into plasma, a strange halfway state between matter and energy. And plasma doesn't behave like normal gas. It forms structures, sheets, threads. It reacts to magnetic fields. It pulses, flows, and reshapes itself in ways that are hard to simulate, even with the best models we have. Think of auroras flickering over the poles, or solar flares whipping out from the surface of the sun. That's the kind of chaos happening around 3IATLAS, but on a much larger scale. James Webb's early observations picked up something even more alarming, a chemical signature dominated not by water, as you'd expect, but by carbon dioxide. That may sound technical, but it's actually huge. Water ice is common on comets. It sublimates only when close to the sun, but carbon dioxide, that stuff turns to gas at much colder temperatures. Which means 3IATLAS started waking up far earlier than it should have. Before most comets would even notice the sun, this one was already flaring to life, building its massive atmosphere while still cruising through the outer reaches of the solar system. By the time it reached Mars's orbit, it was already burning hot, and the presence of so much CO2, that told scientists something else. This object likely formed in an unimaginably cold part of its home system, far colder than where typical comets in our solar system come from. It either originated on the icy fringe of another star's planetary disk, or it's carrying a chemical signature unlike anything we've ever catalogued. A chemical fingerprint that hints at a completely different evolutionary history. One that doesn't match ours. But the weirdness didn't stop there. When the Hubble Space Telescope snapped an image back in July, one of the last official images before everything went mysteriously silent, it revealed something strange. The nucleus at the heart of the coma couldn't even be seen directly. It was completely buried beneath an impossibly bright shroud of dust. The only way astronomers could estimate its size was through indirect brightness modelling. Based on that data, they estimated the core to be no more than 2.8 kilometers across, smaller than the urban centre of a major city. That fact only deepened the mystery. How could an object that small produce such an enormous coma? Even if the surface was packed with volatile ices, even if it was spinning, fragmenting, cracking open like a shattered egg, it still didn't add up. There just wasn't enough mass to explain this level of activity. Theories began stretching thin. Maybe the comet was rotating so fast that centrifugal force was exposing fresh ice at a rapid rate. Maybe it had internal heat sources, trapped radioactive isotopes slowly cooking the inside. But those ideas came with problems. They relied on assumptions that couldn't be proven and contradicted what we know about similar bodies. Comets aren't supposed to behave this way. Not this soon, not this fast, and certainly not on this scale. Then came the amateur footage. Astronomers in Namibia, Chile, Arizona, anywhere with a clear sky and the right gear, started capturing images of the coma, and something stood out immediately. A colour, a glow, a sickly, vivid green that lit up the dust cloud like a neon halo. At first, people thought it was camera noise, maybe overprocessing, maybe atmospheric distortion. But then more images came in, then more. Different cameras, different skies, different nights, but always the same hue. 3IATLAS wasn't just glowing, it was green. And it wasn't a trick of the light. Scientists knew what they were looking at. Diatomic carbon, C2, a molecule that fluoresces green when exposed to ultraviolet light from the sun. It's something we've seen before in other comets, but never like this. Not this intense, not this early. The green glow of C2 is usually a late-stage development, something that appears as the comet nears the Sun and the surface begins breaking down complex carbon compounds. But here, the intensity was off the charts, and it was showing up earlier than expected, which meant one of two things. Either the comet had an unusually high concentration of unstable carbon compounds waiting to break down, or something about its chemistry was allowing those reactions to happen way sooner than normal. Either way, it was another curveball. Every new observation added a new contradiction. The brightness didn't match the coma size. The coma size didn't match the nucleus. The chemistry didn't match the models. The green glow didn't match the timeline. And the patterns within the coma, the plasma sheets, the dust filaments, the symmetry of the structures, didn't match anything. If this were a lab experiment, scientists would have shut it down and double-checked their equipment. But this wasn't a simulation. This was real, out there, right now. And it was heading deeper into the solar system at breakneck speed. The final straw for many came when they tried to model the expansion of the coma itself, based on what we know about how much sunlight the comet was receiving, how much heat was being absorbed, and how fast various ices should sublimate. The coma should have been growing at a modest, calculable rate, but observations showed something different. The coma was ballooning far faster than expected, as if the comet were being supercharged from within. Some theorized that additional volatiles, unknown compounds, were sublimating at lower temperatures. Others said that perhaps the dust particles themselves were unusually reflective, enhancing the apparent brightness and fooling our instruments. A few even speculated that electromagnetic effects, driven by the solar wind interacting with the comet's plasma, could be amplifying the coma's growth by injecting energy into the cloud of ionized gas. But the truth? No one knew. It was all speculation. Educated guesswork built on models that, for the first time in decades, weren't working. And still, the coma kept growing. It's not often that professional astronomers admit defeat. But in quiet corners of research forums, behind closed-door meetings, and buried in cautiously worded scientific preprints, a phrase started appearing more and more often. Unprecedented behavior. That's scientists speak for, we've never seen anything like this. And this was only the beginning. Because while the coma grew larger and brighter, something else began to twist in the night sky. Something that would make the world question everything it thought it knew about how comets behave. And it had to do with the one thing that's never supposed to happen. A comet's tail was pointing the wrong way. A comet's tail always points away from the sun. That's one of the few laws of comet behavior that scientists have never had to question. It doesn't matter which way the comet is traveling, toward the sun, away from it, or even sideways. Its tail is formed by solar radiation, and the solar wind blasting gas and dust off the nucleus and pushing it away from the star at the center of our system. It's not a trail left behind like smoke from a rocket. It's a reaction, a force, a direct response to pressure from the sun itself. But when astronomers began reviewing the latest long-exposure images of 3IATLAS, something didn't sit right. The tail wasn't trailing behind the comet at all. In some frames, it appeared to be stretching out toward the sun. At first it was easy to dismiss. Maybe it was an optical illusion, a photographic artifact. Maybe the angle of the comet's trajectory relative to Earth was playing tricks on our perspective. After all, space is three-dimensional. Celestial geometry can do strange things to our eyes when we project a vast, curved reality onto a flat image. But then the reports started stacking up. Images from Chile, Spain, South Africa, Australia, all showing the same thing. The tail wasn't behaving. It was warping, bending, looping in ways that defied everything the textbook said was possible. And it wasn't just a one-night anomaly. It persisted. One image in particular, captured on September 22nd by a remote observatory in Arizona, made its rounds through the underground astronomy communities like wildfire. It showed the tail curling forward, looping in a broad arc that curved in the direction of the sun, not sharply, not jaggedly, but in a sweeping, deliberate way, like a flag being pulled into a vacuum. Some observers compared it to a magnetic field line. Others said it looked almost like the tail was being attracted to something. Either way, the effect was unmistakable. The tail wasn't being pushed away from the sun. It was being drawn toward it. This shouldn't be possible. The solar wind, a stream of charged particles flowing from the sun, travels at over 400 kilometers per second. It dominates the space between planets, overwhelming any competing forces. For a comet to produce a tail that points toward the sun would require some other force, something stronger than solar radiation, pulling the dust and gas in the opposite direction. But what could that possibly be? Some proposed that electromagnetic forces might be responsible, that perhaps the comet's unusual composition was interacting with the solar wind in unexpected ways. Maybe the plasma in the coma was generating its own magnetic field, twisting the solar wind into a vortex and redirecting the tail. Others argued that the tail we were seeing wasn't made of dust at all, but ions, charged particles that follow magnetic field lines, not just pressure gradients. In that case, the tail might be behaving more like a stream of electricity than a puff of smoke. But these explanations, while creative, didn't explain everything. Because this wasn't just about direction, it was about movement. Observers began to report that the tail was shifting positions from night to night. Not drifting slowly, as comets typically do, but pulsing, changing orientation in sudden, unpredictable bursts. In some images it was straight, in others forked. Some nights it stretched out in a fan-like spray, and others it collapsed into a thin, concentrated ribbon. One astronomer in southern Italy captured a time-lapse that showed the tail twisting mid-exposure, like a snake caught in a crosswind. And through it all, the tail continued to glow with that eerie, greenish light, a radioactive hue that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. No one could explain it. No one had the models to account for it. And so, speculation crept in. There were whispers about hidden objects, dark bodies or rogue planets exerting gravitational influence. Theorists suggested that 3IATLAS might not be a solitary comet at all, but part of a larger invisible system. Some even floated the idea of a binary nucleus, two objects orbiting each other inside the coma, creating gravitational tug-of-wars that distorted the tail's path. But that didn't explain the magnetic anomalies, it didn't explain the light curves. And it certainly didn't explain the fact that the tail was reacting to something no one could see. Then came the most unsettling footage yet. A series of images taken over 3 consecutive nights from a private observatory in Japan showed a sharp, angular kink forming in the tail, like a joint bending at a fixed point. Not a smooth curve, not a drift, but an articulated bend, almost mechanical in nature. The images were verified compared with timestamps and cross-referenced with other observatories. The result? Genuine. The tail had moved in a way that resembled conscious control. Not by the comet itself, no one was saying that. But the resemblance was uncanny, and it raised a chilling possibility that the forces acting on this object weren't entirely natural. By this point, the silence from official agencies had become deafening. NASA's social media channels stopped mentioning the comet altogether. ESA's data feeds had long gone quiet. Hubble hadn't released a new image in weeks, and the James Webb Space Telescope, which had previously shown interest in tracking interstellar objects, had gone dark on the topic entirely. No blog posts, no data releases, not even a mention in weekly observation logs. It was as if 3IATLAS had vanished from the official narrative, despite being one of the most visually spectacular objects in the sky. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers were risking equipment and weather to capture frame after frame, and what they were seeing made no sense. As the tail continued to twist and writhe, another anomaly emerged. Light echo patterns, faint reflections caused by sunlight bouncing off different parts of the coma, began to show asymmetry. That meant the coma wasn't evenly distributed. It wasn't a sphere. It wasn't even a standard cone. It was lopsided, like something inside was pushing material outward in a single direction. And when a team of researchers in India attempted to map the coma's density gradient using photometric modelling, they found something disturbing, a consistent thinning of dust behind the comet and a concentration of material at its front. To put it bluntly, it looked like 3IATLAS wasn't being pushed by the sun. It looked like it was pulling itself through space, like something was driving it. Of course, mainstream science dismissed this. Talk of propulsion, directionality, or internal energy sources was labelled speculative at best, conspiratorial at worst. But the data didn't lie. The tail's direction, the coma's shape, the acceleration patterns, they all painted a picture that didn't match natural cometary behaviour. And with every passing day, the comet drew closer to Mars, There were rumours, unconfirmed of course, that high-resolution observations taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter had revealed even stranger features near the nucleus. Angular shadows, thermal anomalies, perhaps even structured reflections that hinted at metallic surfaces. But those images, if they exist, have never been released to the public. Still, the timing is suspicious. The last confirmed transmission from MRO mentioning 3IATLAS occurred on September 25th. After that, nothing. Radio silence. And all the while, the tale keeps shifting. It's no longer just an astronomical curiosity. It's a phenomenon. A symbol of something just beyond understanding, defying the rules, daring us to question what we think we know about objects from beyond the stars. Because at the heart of it all, one thing remains undeniable. This comet, if that's even what it is acting like no other. Its coma is too big, its glow is too bright, its chemistry is too strange, and now its tail, its most basic, defining feature, is bending toward the very force it should be fleeing from. Physics says that can't happen, but it's happening, and whatever's controlling the direction of that tail may be controlling more than we realize. Something changed the moment 3IATLAS entered the inner solar system, not in the comet itself, but in us, in the way we observed, reported, talked. All the agencies that had been publicly tracking the object since its discovery, NASA, ESA, JAXA, even private players like SpaceX and Blue Origin, quietly went dark. No formal announcements, no press briefings, no tweets. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and suddenly this glowing green-tailed visitor wasn't worth mentioning. But the silence didn't make sense. Not with an interstellar object careening toward Mars, not with amateur astronomers watching it erupt into a cometary supernova, not with its coma larger than Jupiter and a tail that defied physics. You don't ignore something like that. Not if it's natural, not if it's harmless. So what changed? In late August, just as 3IATLAS began its final approach toward the orbit of Mars, several major telescopes suddenly pulled their observing slots. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array, ALMA, in Chile, had previously reserved multiple observation windows to track the comet's composition and trajectory. All of them were quietly cancelled. No explanations were given. Data requests were met with vague replies, rescheduling, refocusing on priority targets, resource reallocation. Meanwhile, the James Webb Space Telescope, already confirmed to have captured early data in July, removed all comet-related observation notes from its public planning log. It was as if the world's most powerful observatory had never been interested in 3IATLAS at all. That's when people began to notice something stranger. Locks, not physical ones, but digital. Online databases that had once streamed raw sky survey data in real time began showing blanks for the region of space where 3IATLAS was travelling. Entire sectors of sky coverage were missing, time-stamped with blank entries, placeholder codes, or data under review messages. Dozens of research forums, once bustling with analysis, grew quiet. Threads dried up. Known comet tracking experts stopped posting. Some accounts were deleted entirely. And still, the comet surged forward, larger, brighter, and more bizarre with every passing day. It wasn't long before the amateur community stepped in to fill the void. Backyard observatories, deep sky enthusiasts, and civilian astronomers with high-grade gear began reporting their own findings. They uploaded footage. They live-streamed tracking sessions. They cross-referenced trajectories and spectra and coma models. But they also noticed the change. Something was wrong. Forums started vanishing. Accounts went missing. On one popular site known for citizen space tracking, a user posted a 4K image of 3IATLAS's tail curling forward, and within 24 hours their account was suspended. No explanation. When others tried to repost the image, it was automatically flagged by content filters, not just suppressed, erased, and it wasn't isolated. Across platforms, videos documenting the comet's growing coma or theorizing on its irregular motion were being algorithmically buried or outright removed. Channels that had never previously been demonetized or flagged were suddenly issued warnings. Some were told they were violating misinformation policies. Others were accused of publishing speculative science without authoritative sourcing. But who decides what's authoritative when the authorities themselves have gone silent? It was almost too orchestrated, too targeted. And then came the observatory lockdowns. In September, A leaked internal memo from a university-affiliated observatory in New Mexico revealed something chilling. Certain telescope arrays were being temporarily repurposed under government request. No public reason was given. The memo, written in bureaucratic vagueness, cited inter-agency collaboration protocols and temporary rerouting of observational assets. But the implication was clear. Someone, somewhere, had decided that 3IATLAS was no longer an open-source scientific curiosity. It was now a restricted event. Why? Theories began to multiply. Some said the object wasn't a comet at all, that it was artificial, an interstellar probe or ancient derelict. Others claimed its trajectory was changing subtly, as if being guided, nudged by gravitational forces we couldn't detect, or something even more advanced. And yet others, citing thermal imaging and light signature anomalies, whispered that there were structures inside the coma, something solid, maybe even mechanical, buried beneath a blinding cloud of dust. But it wasn't just the comet that was acting strangely. It was everything around it. The solar wind itself, normally steady and predictable, had shown irregular fluctuations along the comet's path. The heliospheric current sheet, a vast spiraling structure of solar magnetic fields, appeared to warp as 3IATLAS passed through. That kind of distortion had only been modelled in extreme theoretical scenarios, like what might happen if a strong enough electromagnetic anomaly entered the solar system, and yet no official data was available, no readings, no alerts, just silence. Even the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the satellite that should have had the clearest view as the comet approached the red planet, had gone quiet. Its camera systems, normally updated every few days with new high-resolution surface shots, hadn't posted anything related to the comet since mid-September. That absence only fanned the flames. After all, if something had been detected near the comet's nucleus, and it was close enough to photograph from Martian orbit, wouldn't the world want to see it? Apparently not. It wasn't just professional observatories being locked out, it was space-focused academic departments. Multiple universities reported stalled grants for comet-related studies. PhD students studying cometary physics were told to pivot their thesis topics. Some were directly warned that continued focus on unconfirmed interstellar objects would not be supported. One student in Germany reportedly had their university email access revoked after refusing to redirect their work. The suppression wasn't just digital, it was institutional, and it kept escalating. By the end of September, almost every open-source sky map had stopped updating the real-time position of 3IATLAS. Some had even removed the object entirely, listing it as inactive, not currently visible, or, in one strange case, location classified. But how does a comet become classified? What reason could possibly justify hiding something that was, by all appearances, just an oversized rock and ice ball screaming toward the inner solar system? Unless it wasn't just a rock. Unless there was something inside it, something driving the magnetic anomalies, something causing the plasma coma to grow like an organic system, something pushing back against the solar wind instead of being pushed. Unless the bizarre directional tail wasn't a tail at all. If the theories were wrong, why not just debunk them? Why not show the public clear, updated images and put the rumours to rest? Instead, we got silence, deletions, redirects. Disappearances. And that begs the real question. What are we not supposed to see? Because as 3IATLAS continues its silent journey toward the heart of our solar system, no one seems willing to answer the most obvious question of all: what if it isn't natural? What if we're witnessing the arrival of something else? There's a point in every scientific mystery where explanations stop sounding like science and start sounding like stories. Theories get stretched, data gets ignored, and people, desperate for certainty, settle for the most comfortable lie. But what if the wildest theory is the one that fits best? Because if 3IATLAS isn't a comet, and it isn't behaving like anything nature has produced before, then maybe it's time to stop asking what kind of comet it is, and start asking if it was ever a comet to begin with. That question didn't come out of nowhere. It's been whispered in academic circles, theorized in blacklisted forums, even hinted at by whistleblowers whose credibility was quickly dismantled. But behind the ridicule there's a pattern, a shape that repeats across history, and it always begins the same way. A strange object, behaving unnaturally, entering our solar system from the void beyond. The most famous of these was Oumuamua. Discovered in 2017, Oumuamua was the first confirmed interstellar object to pass through our system. It was small, just a few hundred meters long, but its behavior set off alarms. It moved too fast, changed velocity without any visible propulsion, and rotated in a way no natural body should. Most objects tumble chaotically. This one spun like a baton, smooth, controlled. Some astronomers noted its bizarre shape, flat, elongated, possibly metallic, and when it accelerated away from the sun without ejecting gas or dust like a comet would. One scientist from Harvard said what no one else would. Maybe it's artificial. He was mocked, laughed out of most journals, but years later the questions he raised haven't gone away. In fact, they've gotten louder, especially now, because 3IATLAS is showing the same signs, but on a much grander scale. It's not just interstellar, it's intentionally directed. Its path through space doesn't match any gravitational slingshot or random entry. It curved inward like it had a destination, and if it had simply passed through, we might have chalked it up as another cosmic tourist. But it didn't pass, it slowed down, it's lingering, and now, as it approaches Mars, the possibility we dismissed in 2017 is knocking louder than ever. What if 3IATLAS is not a comet? What if it's a ship? Not in the sci-fi, Star Trek warp speed sense, not something with blinking lights and alien pilots waving out the window, but a vessel, an engineered construct designed to travel across the gulfs of interstellar space, cloaked in ice, dust, and plasma. A comet in disguise. Something built to survive for thousands of years, drawing no attention until the moment it was ready. And now it's arrived. That idea sounds absurd until you look at the evidence. Take the coma. No natural comet has ever developed an atmosphere this size this fast. For 3IATLAS to build a coma larger than Jupiter, it would need to eject material at rates thousands of times higher than even the most violent sun grazer. And yet, its core remains intact. It hasn't fragmented. It hasn't collapsed under the stress. That kind of resilience suggests control, intent. And then there's the light. The glow around the object pulses in consistent rhythmic patterns. Some have suggested it's thermal cycling or radioactive decay, but others have mapped the pattern and found something stranger: regular intervals, consistent timing. Like a beacon, like a signal. It's worth remembering that the idea of alien probes isn't new. In fact, it's been discussed in scientific literature since the 1960s. The Bracewell probe theory proposed that if an advanced civilization wanted to explore distant star systems without needing to travel themselves, they'd send long-duration autonomous probes, slow, patient machines built to gather data, wait, and perhaps even observe. These wouldn't arrive with a fanfare, they wouldn't land on the White House lawn. They'd slip in silently, unnoticed, wrapped in the same dusty camouflage the universe is full of. They'd look like comets. They'd act like comets, until they didn't. And that's exactly what's happening now. 3IATLAS doesn't just break the rules of celestial mechanics, it seems to evade them. Its tail curls toward the sun, its coma moves against solar pressure, its trajectory shifts in ways that suggest maneuverability. 1 week it drifts closer to Mars, the next it accelerates slightly as if responding to something. Not violently, not chaotically, but strategically. What's more disturbing is that it's not the only one. A few fringe observers have suggested that 3IATLAS may not be travelling alone. Multiple faint objects, too dim to be comets, too fast to be asteroids, have been seen shadowing its path. These aren't confirmed, of course. Most have been dismissed as image artifacts or background stars, but the timing is suspicious. One such object was detected flaring for a split second, and then disappearing entirely, like it turned, like it pivoted. And then there's the silence. If 3IATLAS were artificial, if it were broadcasting something, or scanning, or listening, or deploying smaller probes, wouldn't our most powerful observatories want to know? Wouldn't SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, jump at the opportunity? And yet, SETI hasn't said a word. No statements, no signals, just silence, unless the silence is the answer. It's been speculated for years that if we ever did detect something artificial we wouldn't be told, that governments would classify the data, control the narrative, and suppress panic. Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of what we might discover, fear of what the truth could undo. Religious systems, political structures, economic priorities, all of them could crack beneath the weight of one undeniable fact. We're not alone. And maybe we aren't. Because if you look at history, at ancient myths, strange sky events, unexplained appearances of lights and objects in old texts, you start to see echoes, stories of stars that moved against the heavens, of gods descending from the sky wrapped in fire and mist, of green comets that heralded great change. We dismissed those stories as legend, as metaphor. But what if they were memories? What if 3IATLAS is the return of something we forgot? Something we once saw and buried? Some say it's just a comet, that all the anomalies can be explained, that science will catch up, that it's just dust, rock and ice doing weird things. But comets don't move like this. They don't hide their cores. They don't change direction. They don't pulse with light like signals. And they certainly don't shut down space agencies, which leaves us with a choice. We either keep pretending this is natural, or we ask the question no one wants to ask. What if it's here on purpose? Long before telescopes, satellites, or even written language, humans were watching the skies. And what they saw, they recorded. Not in digital logs or technical reports, but in myth, in stone, in stories passed down through generations. They told tales of gods descending in fire, stars that moved like serpents, burning wheels that flew without sound, and green comets that split the heavens. To us, these are myths, allegory. But what if they aren't? What if they were the only way ancient people could describe what they saw with their own eyes? Because when you start digging into those stories, across continents, across eras, you start to notice something deeply unsettling. The same patterns keep showing up. Stories of objects that came from the sky, that stayed for a while, that changed everything. In ancient Sumer, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, there are tablets that describe a flaming chariot that descended from the stars, wrapped in mist and trailing a bright tail. The being that stepped out of it was called Anu, king of the heavens. The Sumerians weren't known for fantasy. Their records are stunningly accurate when it comes to astronomy, math and timekeeping. They weren't writing fairy tales. They were documenting something. Go to Mesoamerica, and the Maya speak of a sky serpent that arrived wrapped in fire. Its arrival coincided with floods, famine, and eventually revelation. To them, it wasn't destruction. It was transformation, a new era, a reset. They even predicted it might return, warning of a green star that would appear and change the world again. Sound familiar? In medieval Europe, the arrival of comets was feared as a harbinger of doom. The green-hued ones especially were seen as signs of divine reckoning. In 451 AD, the so-called Comet of Attila was recorded as appearing just days before the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, one of the bloodiest battles of the age. Eyewitnesses wrote of a sword of light that hung in the sky, unmoving before slowly shifting across the horizon. Modern astronomers have no clear explanation for it. China's records are even older. Their imperial astronomers tracked comets with obsessive precision. One such record from 240 BC describes an object that defied the winds, whose tail wrapped around the sky like a dragon's breath. It remained in the heavens for weeks, longer than any comet should, and then vanished without a trace. Thousands of years, dozens of civilizations, and they all describe the same thing: bright long-tailed objects that don't behave like normal comets, that show up during times of great change, and that always leave people forever altered in their wake, which brings us back to 3IATLAS. Is it possible, just possible, that this isn't the first time it's come near us? Comets aren't random. Their orbits are long, but they repeat. Some return every few decades, some every few centuries, but interstellar objects, they shouldn't come back at all. They enter once, on a hyperbolic path, and then disappear forever. That's what Oumuamua did. That's what Borisov did. But 3IATLAS is different. Its path isn't exactly hyperbolic. It's close, but not definitive. Some models suggest it might even slow down enough to get temporarily captured by the sun's gravity, something that should be almost impossible. Unless, of course, that was the point. Unless it's been here before, and it's meant to return. Could ancient people have witnessed an earlier pass? Could the sky serpent of the Maya, the flaming chariot of the Sumerians, and the sword of light in European skies all be versions of the same event, of the same object returning to check on our world again and again? And if so, what is it checking for? This is where it gets uncomfortable, because if you accept that this object might not be natural, and that it may have come before, then you have to ask, what happens after it shows up? The answer is rarely good. Across mythology and ancient history, these sky visitors are always tied to transformation. Not quiet change, violent change, floods, plagues, mass extinctions, sudden leaps in human evolution or the collapse of entire empires. Not because the comet caused it directly, but because it marked the turning point, the catalyst, the signal that something greater had just begun. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the object doesn't need to destroy us. Maybe it's just the messenger. There's one more piece of this puzzle that rarely gets discussed: missing time. In almost every ancient civilization, there are unexplainable gaps in their records, entire centuries with no writing, no monuments, no clear cultural memory. Some historians blame wars or environmental collapse. But some of these gaps happen worldwide, simultaneously. That shouldn't be possible. Civilizations collapse on their own timelines, not in sync, unless there was a shared event. A moment so massive, so disruptive, that it reset everyone. Could a close pass by an object like 3IATLAS, emitting strange magnetic fields, warping space-time, or releasing unknown radiation, cause that kind of mass forgetting? If it were powerful enough, if it were designed to, or if it triggered something else. That might explain the whispers from the intelligence community, the sudden lockdowns of observatories, the silence from NASA, from ESA, from China's CNSA. These aren't just political moves, they're survival mechanisms, because if someone knows, or even suspects, that this object has been here before, and that its presence historically precedes global upheaval, they wouldn't want panic, they'd want control, they'd want quiet. But silence doesn't change the sky. Every night more amateur astronomers point their scopes upward, they track the coma, they measure the tail, they document every flicker, and increasingly they report something strange. The object appears to be slowing, not in a catastrophic way, but intentionally, as if it's preparing for something, aligning, waiting. For what? Maybe for a signal, maybe for a moment, maybe for us. Because if this thing has come before, if it's visited Earth at regular intervals for thousands of years, then this is not some random cosmic event. It's a cycle, a plan, a program, and we're part of it. That idea scares people. It should. It means we're not alone, that we've never been alone, and that somewhere out there, something watches, something returns, something ancient, something patient, and now, it's back. So as 3IATLAS drifts closer to the inner planets, cloaked in its green glow, silently defying physics and logic and everything we thought we knew, maybe we shouldn't be asking what it is. Maybe we should be asking what it remembers, because whatever is inside that glowing mist has been here before, and this time it didn't come to be seen. It came to be recognized. From a distance, 3IATLAS might still fool you. A glowing green tail, a gaseous coma, a trail that looks every bit like a typical interstellar comet. But the closer you examine it, the more wrong it becomes. Nothing about this object behaves the way it should. Not its orbit, not its heat signature, not even its light. And what's emerging now, from scattered amateur readings and leaked telemetry, is something no one in the mainstream is willing to admit. This thing doesn't just break the rules, it rewrites them. Start with the tail. A comet's tail always points away from the sun. That's Comet Physics 101. The solar wind blows charged particles outward, and the comet's icy body releases gas and dust that gets swept back, forming that long dramatic streak. But 3IATLAS is breaking that rule. Violently, its tail has inverted. Multiple observatories reported that the dust and ion tails have split apart, curving in opposite directions. One appears to be pointing toward the sun, something that no known solar wind interaction can cause. Astrophysicists tried to explain it away. They said maybe the comet had ejected a cloud of material in a weird direction. Maybe it had a fragmenting event. But none of those explanations hold up under scrutiny. The tail isn't erratic, it's stable, and it's shifting in ways that suggest intention. At certain points, it has rotated around the body of the comet, spiraling like it's tethered to a magnetic field, or maybe generating one, and that opens the door to something even stranger. Because according to leaked spectrographic readings, first spotted on amateur science forums before vanishing from the web, 3IATLAS appears to be emitting trace signatures of plasma containment. Plasma. Not just ionized gas, but high-energy, high-temperature plasma, similar to what we see in fusion reactors or the sun's corona. But unlike the sun, which flares wildly and burns chaotically, this plasma is controlled, focused, trapped in bands that orbit the object's core in smooth elliptical arcs. Think about what that means. This comet isn't just glowing, it's managing energy. It's sustaining fields of plasma in layered rotational bands. Natural objects don't do that. Even magnetars, stars with the most powerful magnetic fields in the universe, don't structure plasma this way, which means this object may not be obeying the laws of thermodynamics. It may be generating or containing energy in a way we've never seen, and yet, it's cold. That's the next paradox. Despite emitting light in the visible and UV spectrum, 3IATLAS is cooler than it should be. Based on its brightness, astronomers estimated it should be several hundred degrees Kelvin. But new data shows it may be hovering just above the freezing point of water. How is that possible? If it's radiating energy, it should be hot, unless what we're seeing isn't heat at all, unless the light is being produced by something else. Bioluminescence? No. Too large. Chemiluminescence? Unlikely. Too stable. The leading fringe theory now? Field-based photonic resonance. In other words, the object may be generating electromagnetic fields that excite particles around it, not to heat them, but to light them up, like creating a luminous shell without the actual burn of combustion. Think of a light bulb that glows without ever getting hot. We don't have that tech, but something, or someone, might. Then there's the shape. 3IATLAS isn't round. Initial observations assumed it was roughly spherical, or at least irregular like most comets. But in March, a series of high-contrast, time-lapse images taken from the Atacama Desert revealed a repeating pattern, a trilobed structure, pulsing at regular intervals. Not just bright spots, actual movement. It rotates slowly, rhythmically. The central core appears dark, almost black, with 3 distinct eyes glowing around it, hence the nickname. But comets don't have symmetry. They don't rotate on a fixed axis like that. They tumble. They wobble. Their mass is uneven. This one is balanced, engineered. Even more bizarre? The rotation rate has increased slightly over time. It's not degrading or losing spin from outgassing. It's accelerating, smoothly, as if it's powering itself up, as if it wants to be noticed. And maybe it does. Because for all its mystery, 3IATLAS seems to be broadcasting something. Not in the traditional radio frequencies which SETI has been scanning for decades, but in ultra-low frequency pulses, deep subsonic tones barely above the cosmic background hum. Some ham radio operators with specialized equipment have picked up faint thumping patterns at intervals that match the rotation rate of the trilobed structure. Coincidence? Or is that the sound of a heartbeat? This raises a terrifying possibility. What if 3IATLAS isn't just an object, it's a living system? Not biological in the traditional sense, but a self-regulating entity, a kind of cosmic organism, a hybrid of machine and energy, something ancient, something vast, something awake. And as if that weren't enough, we now have seismic data from Mars. That's right. Mars. A few weeks ago, the InSight lander recorded a series of deep subsurface tremors that don't match any known geological activity. Mars isn't seismically active, and these tremors didn't come from beneath the crust. They came from above, as if something in Mars' atmosphere or orbit was generating waves of energy so strong they penetrated the planet's surface. When did this happen? The same week that 3IATLAS entered Mars' orbital window. Still think it's just a rock. There are whispers now, frantic ones, among planetary defense researchers. They're not worried about an impact. They're worried about interaction. That this object isn't on a collision course, but on a communication course. That its plasma field may be probing nearby planets. That it's observing, learning, mapping, But the most chilling theory yet, it's testing resonance. Resonance is how you destroy a bridge with sound, or shatter glass with the right frequency. If 3IATLAS is emitting directed energy pulses, even weak ones, it could be searching for harmonic frequencies in nearby celestial bodies. In us. Testing how we react, seeing what vibrates, seeing what breaks. And that's not science fiction, that's physics. So now the question is no longer, what is 3IATLAS? The question is, what is it doing? Because this object isn't just a mystery, it's a mirror showing us how much we don't understand. About energy, about motion, about life, about the universe, and maybe about ourselves. It has inverted its tail, controlled its light, cooled its body, accelerated its spin, created magnetic anomalies, emitted silent pulses, and triggered tremors on a planet millions of miles away. And through it all, it hasn't spoken a single word. Because it doesn't need to. Its presence is the message. Its physics are the warning. And whatever it is, it's just getting started. It started small, barely noticeable, almost laughable. A few flickers in low Earth orbit, some strange satellite positioning reports, a handful of classified files that made their way to fringe tech forums. But now it's undeniable. Something is reacting. Not in deep space, not on Mars, not in the void where we expected it, but here, on Earth. And the timing, chillingly precise. Every anomaly, every unexplained shift, every sudden blackout, all began the moment 3IATLAS crossed the outer boundary of our solar system. At first, it looked like a coincidence. A single communication satellite designated GSAT-9 briefly lost orientation. It spun slightly off-axis for just a few minutes, then corrected itself, normal enough until it happened again 2 days later, and again. Then 2 more satellites, unrelated, unconnected, reported similar glitches, GPS disruptions, L-band frequency interference. Ground stations chalked it up to solar windbursts, but the solar activity logs were quiet. No spikes, no flares, just silence. Except for one thing, each glitch occurred at the exact moment 3IATLAS aligned with Earth's orbital plane. Still coincidence? Then came the weather satellites. In early August, NOAA's GOES-16 began detecting strange ionospheric waves, broad, low-frequency ripples that seemed to originate above the atmosphere. Not from solar radiation, not from geomagnetic storms, but from something outside. The waves weren't destructive, but they distorted radio frequencies and interfered with upper atmosphere readings. The patterns were subtle, almost like a whisper, but they matched the low-frequency pulses coming from 3IATLAS. Different instrument, same timing, same rhythm. At this point, civilian scientists started paying attention. Independent observatories began publishing cross-reference data, showing correlations between the object's activity and disturbances in Earth's electromagnetic field. But just as quickly as these reports went up, they vanished. Archived websites were deleted, forum threads were shut down, links went dead. The researchers, silent, or silenced. But the Earth wasn't staying quiet. In September, seismic anomalies began surfacing. Not quakes, but pulses, micro-vibrations registered by geosensors in Siberia, Patagonia, and the Sahara. Places with little tectonic activity. Each pulse was short, weak, but rhythmic, like something was knocking, tapping on the planet's magnetic shell. And if that doesn't sound strange enough, here's where it gets surreal. In 3 separate locations, Greenland, the Pacific Ocean floor, and a deep shaft beneath the Himalayas, sensors picked up echoes of energy signatures from space, but not random noise. They carried a pattern, a return signal. In other words, something from Earth had been pinged, and it responded, like sonar, like a call and answer between our planet and something else. Guess what was overhead at the time? 3IATLAS. Some believe this proves the object isn't just passing through, it's scanning, actively. Sending out magnetic or gravimetric pulses and analysing how planets respond. The Earth answered back, not with intelligence, but with resonance, like striking a tuning fork. It wasn't conversation, it was calibration. But what exactly is it calibrating for? To answer that, we have to look at a darker pattern. military satellites, especially infrared tracking systems, began picking up unusual thermal blooms in low Earth orbit. Not explosions, not launches, just spikes. Small zones of heat, lasting no more than 3 to 5 seconds, with no physical object at the origin point. It's like something invisible had suddenly released energy, then vanished. And the altitude, always between 300 and 500 kilometers, exactly where most of our satellite infrastructure sits, no nation claimed responsibility, no natural explanation fits, and yet they keep happening, always near satellite clusters, always during moments of orbital alignment with 3IATLAS. Here's what that could mean. This object, whatever it is, might be probing not just our planet, but our technology, noticing our surveillance, mapping our defenses, tracking our signals. Some even speculate that it's attempting to interface with our orbital web, that the strange glitches, bursts, and pulses are not interference, but tests, like a hacker trying different passwords, probing the lock, seeing what opens. If that's true, then the silence from space agencies makes a lot more sense, because if they know, or even suspect, that 3IATLAS is actively engaging with Earth's electromagnetic systems, then the worst thing they could do is acknowledge it. Think about it. What happens if the public finds out that an object from outside our solar system has been sending coded magnetic pulses to our planet, and we don't know what it wants? Panic, unrest, collapse in public confidence. So instead, they play dumb. They focus on Mars. They label it a comet. They tell the public to look the other way, all while behind the scenes they move their assets, shift satellites, harden networks, shut down data flows, prepare. Because they're not just afraid of what it is, they're afraid of what it might trigger. You see, there's a theory buried deep in the world of black-budget science, something that's only whispered about at DARPA and in Russian aerospace circles. It's called conscious signal theory. The idea is simple, but terrifying, that sufficiently advanced intelligence might not communicate with words, or even with logic as we know it. They might communicate with events, with changes, with patterns of cause and effect. In other words, they don't talk, they do. And our job is to interpret their intent based on what happens around them. So what does that mean for 3IATLAS? It means that the anomalies, the electromagnetic pulses, the satellite flares and the seismic whispers may not be side effects. They might be messages. Messages not meant for radio telescopes, but for observers like us, to see, to feel, to react. And we are reacting. Defense departments are elevating threat levels. Intelligence communities are running deep simulations. Even private aerospace companies, normally bold and vocal, are suspending launches, delaying missions, tightening PR. They feel it too. Something is engaged, and it may not be neutral. Let's go one step further. If 3IATLAS is aware of us, our orbitals, our machines, our data systems, then what happens if it responds? Not just passively, but directly. What happens if it sends a frequency that shuts down a satellite grid, or interrupts GPS for 24 hours? Or, worse, if it taps into a military satellite, even briefly? We've entered the realm of strategic uncertainty. We don't know if it's hostile. We don't know if it's testing us, or simply observing. But here's the nightmare scenario. What if we trigger it? What if a signal from Earth, a radar ping, a laser comm burst, a nuclear-powered satellite, crosses a line, sends the wrong message, lights up in a way that says threat? What happens when the mirror doesn't just reflect, but reacts? That's the fear that's keeping generals and scientists up at night. That 3IATLAS isn't just watching, it's listening, and it's not alone. Some experts now believe the object may be part of a larger network, a relay, a scout, a trigger node, that once it finishes mapping, measuring, and calibrating, it might signal something else, something on its way, or already here, hidden, waiting. And if that's true, then everything we've been taught about the universe, that it's cold, empty and unaware, may be wrong. The universe might be watching us, and 3IATLAS, it might be our final test. Long before we had telescopes, before rockets, satellites, or spectrographs, humans were looking up, and what they saw wasn't just stars. They saw stories, warnings, patterns, movements in the sky that they believed had meaning, omens, harbingers, beacons of change. And while modern science has dismissed most of these as superstition, something about 3IATLAS is making people rethink everything they thought they knew, because too many of these so-called myths are now aligning with a chilling precision. And whether by coincidence or fate, the arrival of this interstellar object is starting to feel prophesied. It begins with the shape. 3IATLAS gets its name from those 3 glowing lobes orbiting its darkened centre. Science calls them plasma clusters. Analysts call them structural anomalies. But religious scholars, they've seen this before. In ancient Vedic texts, there's mention of a trickster, a tri-headed star that brings knowledge and destruction. In Babylonian star maps, there's a symbol called Udu Idum, literally the 3 eyes. It was considered a messenger of divine reckoning, and in Hopi prophecy, there is talk of a blue kachina, a celestial body with 3 trails that dances across the sky and marks the beginning of a new world age. All unrelated cultures, all continents apart, all talking about a triple-pointed star that arrives from beyond. Now, normally that would be dismissed as poetic metaphor. Until you realise something else, these stories often predict the arrival of such an object after a time of silence from the skies. A period when the stars grow dim, the watchers turn away and the heavens become still. And isn't that exactly what we've seen? A full year with minimal solar activity, major observatories suspiciously going dark, agencies refusing to comment, the sky going silent. Just before 3IATLAS appeared, but it gets deeper. In the Dead Sea Scrolls there is mention of a star of the abyss, a luminous body that walks not with the stars of heaven, nor returns on the path of the sun. Scholars once thought it was metaphor for rebellion, but that phrase, does not return on the path of the sun, is literally how astronomers describe an interstellar object. One that doesn't orbit. One that passes through. Then there's the great sign from Revelation 12, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon at her feet, and a crown of stars above her head, followed by a great red dragon and a time of celestial war. For years it was treated as allegory. But in 2021, astronomers noticed a rare planetary alignment that mirrored the star arrangement in that prophecy. No action followed, but then came the rumours, the slow emergence of 3IATLAS, and suddenly prophecy readers from across the world began whispering again. Even the Mayan long count calendar, which some misinterpreted to predict the end of the world in 2012, has a lesser-known extension, a hidden 13th Baktun, representing not destruction, but contact. A time when the sky gods return not to erase humanity, but to test it. That 13th cycle, according to corrected translations, it begins in late 2025. Coincidence? Or have we been warned for longer than we realise? And then comes the part no one wants to talk about, the names. Across cultures, celestial visitations were often linked to divine or demonic figures, and many of those names are eerily close to what's happening now. In Islamic texts there's mention of Dabadalad, a beast from the earth that speaks to the people during the end of days, not with words, but with signs in the sky. In Norse mythology, Ragnarok begins when a star called Skoll swallows the sun, an inversion of light, where the sky is torn open and something cold and ancient emerges from the void. In Zoroastrian texts, there is a comet called Gochir that appears before a final purification of the earth. The description: a star with a triple flame and a crooked tail. Ancient Persian scribes feared it not because of its path, but because of its silence. It glowed but did not burn. It moved but made no noise. It brought light, but also change, just like 3IATLAS. Now skeptics will say these are just patterns, coincidences, the human brain grasping at myth to explain the unknown. But what if it's the other way around? What if myth was never fiction, but memory? A fragmented, inherited warning passed down through symbols and stories, waiting for a time when we'd be advanced enough to recognize what they were actually talking about. Because the deeper you go, the more disturbing it becomes. Take the Egyptian concept of Ben-Ben. It's the primordial mound, the first land to rise from chaos. But it's also said to have been accompanied by a sky object, shaped like a pillar with a glowing top that emitted energy, the Eye of Ra, the all-seeing force that watched and judged the earth. In some texts, it's described as a mobile star, one that could descend, And then there's Sumerian lore, especially the tales of Nibiru. Not a planet, but a crossing point. A luminous body that travels outside the known celestial loop and brings with it transition, upheaval, and a test of civilization's worthiness. Sound familiar? But perhaps the most disturbing connection comes from the Dogon tribe of Mali, Africa. Long before modern astronomy, the Dogon had detailed knowledge of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye. They claimed this information was given to them by sky beings from a companion object that passes through the solar system every few thousand years. They even described its appearance: dark center, glowing tendrils, rotating light. How would a preliterate tribe know that? Unless they'd seen it before, and maybe it's come back. Because 3IATLAS isn't acting like a comet. It isn't following any natural law. It isn't just strange, it's intentional. And ancient stories don't describe random rocks in the sky. They describe witnessed events. Objects that appeared, altered the world, and left behind memory. Carved in stone, painted on walls, hidden in verses, and passed down in secret. So what are we really seeing? A comet? A probe? Or a cycle? A repeating celestial event that marks the end of one age and the beginning of another. And maybe we were never meant to understand it through telescopes. Maybe the real warning was always in the stories, the symbols, the old names. Maybe our ancestors didn't imagine these things. Maybe they remembered them. And now, we remember too. Because when science goes silent, myth speaks loudest. And 3IATLAS? It might be the echo of something we've always known was coming back. By now we've established that 3IATLAS is not acting like a comet. It's not following natural laws. It's doing things that break our models and ignore our expectations. But what if that's not the most disturbing part? What if the real shock isn't what it's doing, but what people knew about it long before it ever got here? Because as more and more data comes to light, one theory is rising from the fringe and becoming harder to ignore. This wasn't random. This didn't just happen. Someone, somewhere, knew, and they've known for a long time. Let's start with the timelines. The earliest amateur detection of 3IATLAS dates back to late 2023, but newly surfaced data suggests it was picked up much earlier, by military-grade space radars in early 2022. That's over a year before the public had any clue. Why was it kept secret? More importantly, why did multiple nations, normally in fierce competition, suddenly cooperate to shut down data streams the moment it entered our heliosphere? That's not how space agencies behave. But there's a pattern here. The James Webb Space Telescope was operational by mid-2022. Its public mission: explore deep space and analyze exoplanets. Its classified mission: unclear. What we do know is that several key observation windows, especially in late 2023, were sealed. No public data, no open logs, not even redacted summaries. For an instrument that was funded by international coalitions and built for scientific transparency, that kind of blackout is unprecedented. And here's where it gets strange. Leaked internal memos from a private aerospace contractor, whose name we won't mention here, mention something called Project Locus. Buried in bureaucratic language is a phrase that stands out: Preemptive Orbital Shielding Simulation, ETA Impact Window, Q4 2025. That memo was written in 2018. Think about that. They were running shielding simulations tied to an impact window for late 2025, 7 years ago, before 3IATLAS even had a name, before it was discovered, before it was supposed to exist. Unless, of course, it was never a surprise to begin with. Which leads us to another breadcrumb, one buried deep in patent records. In 2017, a small tech company filed for an adaptive electromagnetic resonance modulator, described as being capable of intercepting and retranslating deep space low-frequency anomalies. On the surface, it sounds like obscure signal tech, but the patent's filing location: Svalbard. That's the same remote Arctic location as the Global Seed Vault and a top-secret NATO satellite ground station. The coordinates match within 2 kilometers. Now, why would anyone file advanced signal tech patents from a frozen island guarded by military surveillance? Unless they were listening for something, and now they've found it. Some researchers believe this is proof of a long-standing observation program, one that's been quietly tracking interstellar objects, waiting for one in particular, not just to pass through our solar system, but to interact. And 3IATLAS might be that object, the one they were waiting for. But why keep it secret? Because of what's in the simulations, the ones from Project Locus, the ones from ESA's leaked internal training modules, the ones run on AI threat mapping systems at DARPA. They all point to the same terrifying possibility. 3IATLAS might be a probe, a scout, a trigger, and if humanity reacts the wrong way, fires at it, interferes with it, even tries to shut it down, it could activate something much worse. These simulations don't just predict chaos, they predict response, something external, fast, coordinated, and devastating. So now the question becomes, how long have they known? And who exactly is they? One name keeps surfacing, the breakaway group. Officially, it doesn't exist. But in declassified Cold War documents, there's mention of a private think tank formed in the 1950s, comprised of rogue astronomers, intelligence analysts and mathematicians. Their mission? Track anomalous orbital signatures, especially those not bound to our Sun. They had no national allegiance. They were funded by multiple governments, but operated completely outside jurisdiction. In one obscure CIA transcript, a senator refers to them as the ghost cartographers of space. Their last known meeting, the same year the Mayan calendar ended. And the same year high-orbit telemetry stations across the globe were suddenly upgraded to include gravitational flux sensors. Not magnetic, not electromagnetic, gravitational. Why? Because something was coming, or worse, returning. And here's the final piece, a transmission. On March 17, 2024, amateur radio astronomers in Chile picked up a deep space signal. Short, rhythmic, not naturally repeating. When mapped to audio spectrum, it created a waveform resembling Morse code. The sequence translated loosely into, "We have waited, now you watch." Official sources dismissed it as interference. But just 3 days later, the first visual confirmation of 3IATLAS was made. Still think that's a coincidence? Because now we're in the part of the story that no one wants to tell. The one where secret knowledge isn't just suspected, it's confirmed. The one where silence isn't ignorance, it's strategy. Governments are no longer in control, they're reacting. Agencies are no longer leading, they're scrambling. Because the people who do know what this is don't seem very eager to share it. And maybe that's because the endgame is already in motion. Maybe Project Locus wasn't about shielding Earth. Maybe it was about communicating with whatever this is, and maybe it already responded. Because what if 3IATLAS isn't just being observed? What if it's observing us to see if we're ready? For contact, for judgment, or for replacement? For weeks now, scientists have danced around the issue. They've used vague terms like non-threatening, unusual but stable, and under observation. But behind closed doors, a very different conversation is happening. Because the question is no longer what 3IATLAS is, but what happens when it gets closer. And now that its trajectory is confirmed to skim past Mars before looping near Earth's orbital path, the stakes have changed completely. We're not talking about impact, at least not directly. We're talking about influence on gravity, magnetism, and even the Earth's own orbital stability. And the data pouring in from private observatories suggests this object, whatever it is, has a field effect that's far stronger than it should be. Based on size and mass estimates, its gravitational pull should be negligible. Yet nearby asteroids have shifted. Satellite orbits around Mars have tightened. One even experienced signal loss and brief instrumentation failure, just as 3IATLAS passed behind it. That's not normal, that's not physics, that's influence. And if it's already affecting Mars, we have to ask, what happens when it gets closer to us? The Earth's magnetosphere is a delicate shield. It protects us from solar radiation, maintains satellite function, and stabilizes global weather systems. It's also sensitive, highly reactive to cosmic influences. The solar maximum alone causes minor disruptions. But now, scientists are quietly modeling what might happen if a high-mass, high-energy, low-velocity object like 3IATLAS enters near-Earth space. The results? Not comforting. One simulation from a disavowed academic paper, quietly leaked and quickly removed, suggests that the magnetic bow shock around Earth could be distorted by over 17%. That might not sound like much, until you realize it would cause localized pole instability. Compass readings would fluctuate, GPS satellites would drift, and in extreme cases, Northern lights could appear in the tropics, while communications in high-latitude regions black out completely. And that's just the magnetic effect. The gravitational ripple, worse. 3IATLAS doesn't move like a comet, it moves like it's steering, and if its path pulls it close to Earth, even a minor gravitational nudge could shift Earth's position relative to the Sun by a fraction of a percent. Again, small numbers, big consequences, seasonal drift, tidal anomalies, jet stream disruption, earthquakes in zones that haven't been active in centuries, not from tectonic stress, but from orbital imbalance. We're not talking extinction. We're talking recalibration of life as we know it, and governments know this, because they are already preparing. Across the globe, quiet construction projects have begun. Subsurface bunkers, expanded seed vaults, underground data centres in Norway, Switzerland and New Zealand. In Alaska, a new installation was constructed last winter, officially for atmospheric research. But satellite imagery shows something different. Reinforced roof structures, ventilation hoods consistent with life support systems, and antenna arrays pointed not toward weather patterns, but deep space. That's not research. That's refuge. And here's what makes it more alarming. These facilities aren't being staffed by climatologists or engineers. They're being staffed by behavioral scientists, linguists, and exobiologists. Why would you need those specialists for weather research? You wouldn't, unless you're preparing for something more than weather. And then there's the drills. In early 2025, NATO and several Asian defense alliances will run a joint simulation called Operation Veilfall. Officially, it's for a large-scale satellite failure event. Unofficially, it includes protocols for civil blackout, data purge, and relocation of critical personnel to continuity hubs. That's not disaster planning. That's reset protocol. And if you're wondering why none of this has made the news, the answer is simple: compartmentalization. Only the highest levels of multiple agencies know the full picture. Everyone else gets a piece, just enough to do their part. The person laying concrete in Iceland has no idea it's for a deep earth biosample vault. The network engineer installing servers in New Mexico doesn't know those systems are isolated from the global web. The atmospheric chemist running wind simulations in Greenland isn't told his data is being rerouted to military satellites. It's not a cover-up, it's a mosaic, each piece harmless on its own. But when you zoom out, the picture is clear. We're preparing for something global, and it's not theoretical anymore. Which brings us to the final point. Earth is being watched. Amateur astronomers have begun detecting unknown probes, small, fast-moving objects with anomalous heat signatures, tailing behind 3IATLAS. At first, they were dismissed as debris, but now, at least 3 have shown patterns inconsistent with random motion. They're adjusting, redirecting. One even slowed down, as if observing. So what happens when they get closer? No one knows. But here's what's being whispered. If 3IATLAS is some kind of reconnaissance object, organic or artificial, then its proximity to Earth is no accident. It's a test to see how we respond. Do we panic? Do we attack? Do we prepare in secret? Or do we reach out? Because maybe this isn't a harbinger of destruction. Maybe it's a mirror. Maybe it's reflecting who we are when we think the world is ending. And maybe that's the final test. Not science, not survival, but character. Because if 3IATLAS doesn't just measure energy or gravity, but consciousness, cohesion, or intent, then how we act now might shape what comes next. For all the chaos surrounding its arrival, for all the secrecy, speculation, and silent panic, no one has truly stopped to consider the exit. The moment after, the silence that follows. What if 3IATLAS does exactly what some believe it was meant to do, and then just leaves? No impact, no destruction, no first contact, just a slow fade back into the void, disappearing as mysteriously as it arrived, a shadow receding into the stars, leaving Earth spinning behind it like a shaken snow globe. That idea should be comforting, but it's not. Because if it leaves, then something far more unsettling becomes clear. It was never about arrival, it was always about aftermath. And that's where the real damage begins, not in the skies, but in our systems, in our understanding, in our perception of reality. Because you don't just unsee an object like 3IATLAS, you don't go back to weather forecasts and school drop-offs and tax seasons once you've glimpsed something impossible. coasting through the heavens like it owns the place. Humanity has always carried a kind of invisible arrogance, the quiet assumption that we're alone, that we're in charge, that everything in the cosmos just sort of happens around us. Atlas shatters that. Even if it leaves, the message remains. You are not alone. You're not the center. You are being watched. And more importantly, you were chosen. That idea that Earth was visited, not conquered, sets off a psychological chain reaction. Already we're seeing the early tremors, ideology fracture, belief system reshuffling, governments tightening their control not out of aggression but out of fear. Because how do you govern a population that now believes there's something bigger out there? Something that didn't ask permission, didn't make demands, and didn't care about borders or politics or power. If Atlas leaves, it leaves behind a spiritual vacuum. A world forced to confront the unknown without closure. That kind of psychological instability doesn't cause riots or protests. It causes identity erosion, quiet unrest. Doubt turned inward. For some, it sparks awakening. For others, collapse. And for those in power, the biggest threat isn't the object itself. It's the questions it forces everyone else to ask. What else have they hidden? Who's really in control? Why were we never told? Those questions are the seeds of systemic failure. And if they're not answered fast and convincingly, entire societal models could fracture. Not through war, but through irrelevance. What use is a government that didn't even see it coming? What use is a religion that can't explain what just passed by? What use is a science that keeps revising its rules after every mystery it can't explain? Because let's be clear, if Atlas leaves, it will break science. Not with data, but with doubt. Consider this. If 3IATLAS exits our solar system the same way it entered, on a non-ecliptic trajectory, unaffected by solar pull, ignoring planetary gravity, then we're left with only one explanation. It was navigating, intentionally. And if that's true, then physics as we know it, our sacred constant, is suddenly suspect. Because what else have we misunderstood? What forces are we calling dark energy simply because we can't name them yet? And what happens when scientists start whispering that behind closed doors? We've already seen the first cracks, anomalies in gravitational lensing, energy readings that don't make sense, infrared patterns that look patterned. And when Atlas leaves, those anomalies don't vanish. They get archived, dismissed publicly, studied quietly, built into the next wave of black-budget research programs that we'll never hear about until it's too late. But it's not just science that breaks, it's trust. And that's the real aftershock. The public has short memory for disaster, but a long memory for deception. And when 3IATLAS finally fades from the sky, the internet won't go quiet. It'll go nuclear, leaked footage, amateur deep space logs, reanalysis of agency denials, Reddit boards flooded with frame-by-frame satellite captures, TikToks with 12 million views connecting ancient cave art to electromagnetic emissions. Once Atlas leaves, the world becomes addicted to the trail it left behind. We'll analyze everything. We'll weaponize doubt. We'll never stop looking up. And that's the irony. Atlas doesn't need to stay to change humanity. It only needs to pass through, a whisper through the void, and we're forever altered. But some believe it won't be that simple, because there's a second theory rising, one far more dangerous than the first. The theory that Atlas seeded something, not biological, not physical, but informational, that it left a frequency, a transmission, a pattern embedded in the electromagnetic soup of our atmosphere, too low to detect, too complex to decode, but still there, waiting, resonating, affecting machines, affecting thoughts, a kind of background whisper that slowly rewires us from the inside. It sounds insane until you learn that post-Atlas detection, brainwave studies in high-latitude populations began showing subtle anomalies. Slight shifts in theta patterns, increased occurrences of hypnagogic hallucinations, surge in lucid dreaming among people who had never experienced it before. No one connected the dots, because no one wanted to, but the dots were there, and the question becomes, what if Atlas didn't leave us alone? What if it left something behind to keep watching, or to keep waiting? Because the final, most terrifying possibility is this. 3IATLAS was never meant to interact. It it was meant to signal. A flare in the dark, a ping on the interstellar map. And now that it's come and gone, others may follow, not to explore, not to visit, but to harvest. To judge, to reclaim. And when they arrive, they won't ask who we were before Atlas. They'll only care who we became after. Did we fall into chaos? Did we cling to our false gods? Did we pretend it never happened? Or did we evolve? Did we rise? Did we remember? Because maybe that's what it was all for, not to end us, but to awaken us. And now that the stars are watching, we have no choice but to answer. In the weeks following the departure of 3IATLAS, something strange began to happen. It wasn't dramatic at first. It didn't start with earthquakes or meteor strikes or burning skies. No, the shift was subtler than that. Slower. Almost imperceptible. But to those who were watching, truly watching, it was undeniable. Something had changed. Something deep. Something global. And it didn't start in a laboratory or an observatory or a government war room. It started in the fringes, in the quiet places, with people nobody listens to until it's too late. The first anomaly came from the Himachal region in northern India. Villagers living at high altitudes began reporting an eerie hum. Not loud, not mechanical. Just a low, steady frequency that only a few could hear. It came at night. It wasn't tied to any power lines, any weather events, or any nearby industry. But here's the disturbing part. It matched precisely with a frequency spike detected by an abandoned Soviet ionospheric station in Kyrgyzstan on the exact same night, thousands of miles apart. Same frequency, same time, no explanation, and that was just the beginning. Within days, scattered reports began surfacing from other parts of the world. In Bolivia, a rural town experienced a 17-minute blackout, but only in their local grid. No storms, no damage, no solar flare. The only thing recorded was a brief electromagnetic pulse that didn't match any natural or man-made source. And right at the moment the blackout occurred, cows began running in circles, birds dropped dead, and a child born that night was found to have a fully formed tooth, a rare and unexplained genetic anomaly seen in fewer than 1 in 10 million births. Coincidence? Possibly. But it didn't stop there. In South Korea, surveillance satellites meant for maritime tracking began showing phantom vessels, large heat signatures that appeared for seconds at a time in the Pacific Ocean, then vanished. No visual confirmation, no radar trace, just heat. Shifting, moving, intelligently paced. The military dismissed it as solar reflection interference, but internal whistleblowers claimed otherwise. One anonymous engineer said the shapes moved like wolves, coordinated and hunting. But the strangest event occurred in the Algerian Sahara. A team of archaeologists, excavating what they thought was an ancient meteor impact site, uncovered something they weren't expecting. A layer of melted quartz fused with highly magnetized iron ore, shaped not by explosion, but by precision, like it had been sculpted by some kind of directed energy, thousands of years ago. Embedded inside was a small sphere, smooth, metallic, and giving off faint radiation in a frequency never before seen. Not harmful, not decaying, just humming. 3 days later, the lead archaeologist disappeared, vanished without a trace. His last message, sent via satellite phone, contained only 3 words. It's still awake. And then, silence. These aren't internet stories or creepypasta. These are field reports, scientific anomalies, and documented events, but no one's talking about them, not because they're being silenced, but because no one knows how to explain them. Atlas came, Atlas left, and the world has been acting strange ever since. Time feels off. People have started reporting lost hours, not sleepwalking, not memory gaps, just time skipping. A man in Finland recorded a podcast at 6 p.m. and uploaded it to 7 but his timestamp showed a 9-hour gap, without a single second of data loss. His phone battery remained unchanged, his watch never stopped, his light stayed on. But somehow, 9 hours disappeared from the timeline. In the US, pilots have begun reporting visual glitches at high altitude, brief flashes of impossible geometry, shapes that shouldn't exist, angles that defy physics. One pilot described it as looking through a kaleidoscope made of math. Flight recorders picked up no anomalies, but the pilot's heart rate spiked, and days later, he began sketching the same spiral over and over again, on napkins, walls, even his own skin. The same symbol seen etched into the metal sphere found in Algeria. And then came the dreams. People around the world, millions of them, began dreaming of the same thing. A tower, monolithic, endless, stretching into space. Some described climbing it, others falling from it. Many saw a door at the top, and through that door, a light, cold, blue, not fire, not sun, something older, something that sees. These dreams spiked in frequency 3 days after Atlas left our orbit. Medical professionals called it collective unconscious alignment, a fancy phrase for we have no idea why this is happening. But the alignment didn't stop with dreams. Linguists began noticing something peculiar, converging speech patterns. Across unrelated languages, phrases that had never existed began appearing spontaneously in unrelated communities. A group in Papua New Guinea began using a word for sky listener that didn't exist in any of their known dialects. Meanwhile, a tribe in the Amazon started singing songs that shared a melodic structure with ancient Nordic chants, songs they had never heard before. Researchers now believe Atlas may have seeded some kind of semantic echo into Earth's consciousness, altering our shared archetypes through exposure to its field. And what about the Earth itself? Seismologists are baffled. Microquakes have increased. Small, shallow tremors not tied to fault lines. They're evenly distributed, geographically random, but every single one of them emits a subharmonic frequency that, when mapped, forms a three-dimensional grid that matches the orbital path of Atlas. In other words, the Earth is humming in response to where it used to be, as if the planet remembers, and maybe that's the real revelation here. Maybe Atlas didn't just pass by. Maybe it woke something up, not just in space, not just in governments, but in us. Something primal, dormant, coded into our bones from before history began. A memory of watchers, of visitations, of trials and judgments. We forgot. We buried it. But Atlas remembered. And in passing us by, it reignited that flame. So the question now isn't whether Atlas changed the Earth. It's whether we'll survive what comes next. Because the anomalies aren't slowing down, they're increasing. And while scientists scramble for explanations, and politicians posture for control, the real story is unfolding where no one's looking, beneath the surface, in the frequencies, in the dreams, in the quiet spaces between thoughts. Something is happening. Something has begun. And the age of ignorance is officially over. Long before telescopes, before satellites, before physics, there were stories, carved into stone. Whispers passed through generations, coded into myths, rituals, chants. At first glance, they seem like legends, primitive attempts to explain the stars. But if you look closer, a disturbing pattern emerges. Across civilizations that never met, separated by oceans, languages, and time, the same message echoes over and over again. Something comes from the sky. It is not a god. It is not a storm. It is a watcher, and it returns. One of the earliest known records comes from the Dogon people of Mali, a tribe long believed to possess impossible astronomical knowledge. Long before modern science confirmed the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, the Dogon were already describing its orbit, density, and companion star. But buried deeper in their oral tradition is mention of a third star, one that visits, one that sees but does not speak. They call it Nomo's Eye, a silent traveller. It comes once in a great cycle, appears in the sky as a tri-eye serpent, then disappears, leaving behind changes to the world, seeds that grow into new knowledge, or destruction if misused. 3 eyes. Sound familiar? Thousands of miles away in the Chilambalam texts of the Mayan Yucatan, an untranslated passage refers to a cold star with 3 voices. It says it brings no fire, but still burns the sky, and moves outside the serpent path, likely referring to the zodiac. The passage ends with this cryptic line: "When the sky flickers like fish scales, the one who measures shall return." And time will become the question. Interpret that however you like, but it points to something moving against expected celestial paths, tied to timing and leaving behind uncertainty. which is exactly what 3IATLAS did. And then there's the Vedas. In the Hindu Rig Veda, a lesser-known hymn speaks of a dark star without heat that visits when the age turns to shadow. It describes this object as having no tether to the firmament, yet being more feared than lightning. The hymn warns that when this star comes, children shall speak in sleep, animals shall know the winds, and rulers shall lie with blood on their lips. Again, this is from thousands of years ago. How could they have known to describe a celestial body that bends no to orbital norms, appears silently, and stirs biological response? Unless they saw it before, unless it's been here, and it's coming back. In Chinese myth, there's the story of Sanmu Xing, or the three-eyed star. It's said to be a wandering celestial judge that visits the earth once every great dynasty, not to punish, but to observe. If it deems the world imbalanced, it sends forth the cloudless rain, and reverses the order of the cranes. Scholars often interpreted this as metaphor, but now, with what we know of Atlas, it reads like a direct description, a silent observer whose mere presence brings change, not destruction, not miracles, but recalibration. Even the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories reference a star that sings, one that dances with no partner and comes during the silent rains. It is not a threat, it is not a guide, it is the witness. That phrasing shows up across other traditions too, the witness, the seer, the observer who does not blink. And it appears most shockingly in a place no one expected, Sumerian cuneiform tablets. In 2018, a set of tablets recovered near Eridu, one of the oldest known cities, were translated by an independent team of linguistic archaeologists. One tablet refers to a tree-eye in the Southern Watch that returns when kings eat kings and writes on the earth without touching it. The glyph for tree-eye is nearly identical to the symbol that emerged in brainwave studies after Atlas passed. A spiral within a triangle. Coincidence? Maybe. But how did a civilization over 6,000 years ago describe a cosmic phenomenon that mimics gravitational lensing, an effect we only began to understand in the 20th century? Because this thing doesn't just pass through space, it changes meaning, it reshapes stories. And what if that's the point? Maybe the reason so many cultures seem to remember Atlas is because they actually do, not in memory, but in myth memory. Encoded experience, abstracted into metaphor to survive generations. When you don't have language for electromagnetic resonance or orbital perturbations, you say, the sky sang. When you don't understand quantum gravity, you say, the gods bent the mountain. It's not ignorance, it's translation. It's myth as survival. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Many of those ancient stories describe what happens after the Watcher leaves, and the common thread, humanity splits, not in war, but in perception. Some see the event as divine, others see it as punishment. A few refuse to believe it happened at all, and in every version the world fractures, not physically but philosophically. Tribes form, ideas polarize, and a new kind of war begins, not with weapons, but with truths. The war of interpretation, and we're seeing that happen now. One faction believes Atlas was extraterrestrial tech, a probe, a data-gathering device sent to scan Earth's biosphere. Another sees it as a natural anomaly, a rogue planet or micro-black hole that simply wandered too close. But others, quietly growing in number, believe something more, spiritual, that it's a test, a filter, something that shows up not at random but at tipping points in civilization. What if they're right? What if Atlas only appears when humanity is on the verge of collapse or transcendence? A cosmic tuning fork, not judging, not guiding, just resonating, reflecting, stirring the deep waters and seeing what floats. That would explain why it's mentioned in end-time prophecies but never depicted as violent, why it shows up in dreams, not disasters, why its return is feared and revered but never prevented. You can't stop a mirror, you can only face it. And maybe that's the final truth hidden in all these myths. Atlas is not a threat. Atlas is a trigger. It doesn't bring the end. It marks the moment when we choose what kind of ending we want. And now that the stars have spoken in the language of myths, in the dreams of children, in the ripples of time, the choice is ours. 3IATLAS was supposed to be gone by now. That was the narrative. It entered from the edges of our solar system, flared up as it neared Mars, and passed by Earth with a cosmic shrug before slingshotting into the black. That's the version that made headlines. That's the story the agencies told. An interstellar visitor, curious, mysterious, but temporary. A ghost ship drifting through the solar sea, a freak occurrence, an event for the books. But something doesn't add up, because if Atlas was truly gone, the noise should have stopped. The hums, the anomalies, the dream phenomena, the electromagnetic disruptions, they should have faded. They didn't. If anything, they've intensified. More people are hearing it now. More systems are acting strange. The anomalies are no longer rare. They're routine. Atmospheric pressure waves with no storm source, magnetosphere fluctuations with no solar activity, bursts of radiation that don't match any star, and beneath it all, a strange recurring pulse. Some are calling it the heartbeat. It's low, subsonic, but it's there. Astronomers have picked it up on deep space antennas meant for listening to cosmic background radiation. It's not coming from a fixed point in the sky. It's moving, slowly, carefully, like something changing position. Not far away, but close. Incredibly close. Too close. Which raises the question, what if Atlas never left? What if what we saw slingshotting past Mars was only a piece? Think about it. What if 3IATLAS was never a comet or a singular object at all, but a system, a carrier, a signal, a lure, something designed not to pass by, but to activate, to plant something, to wake something? What if the real Atlas wasn't what we saw, but what we felt? And the evidence is mounting. Consider this. Observatories have quietly started repositioning their telescopes. Not toward deep space, but toward Earth's Lagrange points, those gravitational parking spots where satellites and objects can remain suspended indefinitely. These are the places where you would hide something if you didn't want it noticed, something that could hover undisturbed, invisible to standard tracking systems. And in Lagrange Point 5, just days after Atlas departed, a tiny thermal anomaly was detected. Not enough to trigger a full alert, just enough to raise eyebrows. The signal flickered for 43 minutes, then vanished. But in those 43 minutes, a pattern emerged. A repeating burst, 5 pulses, then silence, then 3 pulses, then silence, then one long pulse. 5, 3, 1. The sequence was oddly familiar to mathematicians. It wasn't random. It mirrored a Fibonacci spiral, backwards. Nature's code inverted, not evolving toward complexity but collapsing toward origin, imploding, resetting. That's not a comet, that's a message. And here's where things get truly unsettling. In a classified report leaked by an anonymous source within a major European space agency, data from long-range probes showed an object matching Atlas's mass entering Earth's orbit, not leaving it, just hours after its alleged departure. The report never called it a return. It simply listed the trajectory as nonlinear gravitational adaptation, a fancy way of saying, we don't know what the hell this is doing. The object changed speed, changed direction, then disappeared from radar entirely. Not because it accelerated, because it became invisible, and we've seen this before. In quantum physics, there's a phenomenon known as observation collapse, where particles change behavior simply by being watched. But what if Atlas is the reverse? What if it activates when it's not observed? What if the moment we stopped tracking it was exactly when it began? Which brings us to the most terrifying theory of all. Atlas was never coming to show us anything. It was coming to watch how we respond. Every telescope trained on it, every video uploaded, every social media post, every theory, every fear. We didn't just observe Atlas, we interacted with it, we fed it, emotionally, psychologically, perhaps even energetically. And in doing so, we became part of the signal, a feedback loop. Atlas came not to arrive, but to be received. So what happens now? Well, that depends on what Atlas was here to trigger. Some believe it's a consciousness test, that it's measuring global coherence, tracking whether we descend into chaos or evolve into unity. That would explain the psychological divergence happening now, the increasing polarity in beliefs, the spread of mass dream phenomena, the surge in so-called downloads people claim to be receiving, sudden flashes of information, strange symbols, even language they can't explain. Others say Atlas is something far more ancient, a mechanism built by civilizations far beyond our understanding, a kind of cosmic software update that runs only when the conditions are right. When a species reaches a technological threshold but hasn't yet destroyed itself, when awareness flirts with collapse, a built-in failsafe or perhaps a fork in the road. But not everyone is so hopeful. Some say Atlas is a virus, a thought form seeded into planetary systems to replicate across civilizations. That the dreams, the anomalies, the symbols, it's all code, a mimetic virus designed to alter perception, break down traditional structures of thought, and prepare the mind for occupation. Not through war, not through machines, but through belief. That once enough minds accept the new reality, the veil thins, the door opens, and what waits behind that door isn't friendly. Whatever the truth is, one thing is becoming clear. Atlas may have come from out there, but now it's in here, in our systems, in our myths, in our dreams, in our collective operating system. We are no longer just observers, we are the experiment. And the clock is still ticking. Because if this really is a countdown, if that heartbeat echo is more than just background radiation, then we're approaching something. A moment, a convergence. Whether it's an awakening, a collapse, a revelation, or something far stranger, it's coming. Not tomorrow, not next century. Now. Because Atlas didn't leave, it arrived. We found a mirror. 3IATLAS came into our world silently, without warning and without explanation. It defied our models, mocked our predictions, and danced through the sky like it had been here before. And maybe it had. Maybe it always has been. Not as an object, but as an idea. A recurring anomaly that appears only when the world forgets how to question the sky. Not a threat, not a savior, but a signal. A reminder that the universe is not finished speaking to us. Because for all our telescopes and data streams, we still don't know what Atlas is. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it isn't meant to be understood with formulas or mapped with spectrometers. Maybe it's a test of perspective. The way we respond says more about us than about it. We called it alien. We called it divine. Some said it was a trick of light, others called it prophecy. But every theory, every reaction, it revealed something deeper. Our fear of the unknown, our hunger for meaning, our desperation to make the universe about us. And yet, despite all of it, Atlas didn't demand anything. It didn't speak. It didn't threaten. It didn't destroy. It simply arrived. And in doing so, it cracked something open. A layer of silence between what we see and what we sense. It moved the needle just enough to make people dream differently. It distorted radio waves just enough to make us question if someone was listening. And it left, if it left, with more mystery than we had when it came. But here's the question that haunts us now. Did Atlas come from the stars, or from inside the human timeline itself? Because civilizations separated by continents somehow remembered it. Cultures with no contact told the same story. A three-eyed visitor, a watcher, a seer. They gave it different names, but the pattern was the same. It arrives in times of transition. It lingers just long enough to turn stories into symbols, and then it fades, leaving behind questions that rewrite entire generations. What if that's the real impact? Not gravitational, not magnetic, but mythic. What if Atlas is a turning point encoded in the rhythm of human consciousness, activated when we reach a certain threshold of self-awareness or self-destruction? A pressure valve in the psyche of the species, not sent to save us, not meant to warn us, just to reflect us. And what we saw this time wasn't just light bending or magnetospheres shifting. What we saw was the next version of the human story knocking on the door. Now it's up to us to answer. Will we ignore it, package it as a viral moment, archive it as an unexplained event to be forgotten in the noise? Or will we finally admit, quietly, reverently, honestly, that we were witnessed? Not invaded, not judged, just seen. Because sometimes the universe doesn't send instructions. Sometimes it sends a mirror. And this time, the mirror blinked first.